it was courteous, it was professional, it acknowledged the possibility that confusion might have arisen from editing a statement in that way. But also as well, it didn't pretend that it hadn't happened. This response, this reply was a human one as much as it was a corporate one. It was one which said, "We are a team. We are made up of people who are doing our best, and I took the decision to do this, that, and the other." It's kind of refreshing, not just having an organisation saying, "No, we always get things right, and if we don't get things right, then we don't comment on it." Hello, and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 17th of November, 2025. I'm joined, as ever, by my co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman, and this week we are going to have a conversation about something which is inevitable in the world of archaeology, and that is, at times, having to modify or alter our public stance on something, archaeology comms and interactions with the public. But also as well, it's a bit of a good news story on the front of actually also being open to answering questions when they're put your way. So, I'm quite looking forward to this one. But before we dive into that, we have a couple of news stories that we'd like you guys to be aware of or maybe keep an eye on. Starting with,
and these are all stories actually that are sort of follow-ups to things that we've already covered on the Watching Brief, or I've covered separately in Pipeline. The first story is a report from Middle East Monitor, which ties in really with the very contentious debate about the status of Israeli academics and archaeologists at the European Archaeological Association conference in Belgrade a couple of months back. This was prior to the negotiated, for want of a better word, ceasefire in Gaza. The debate was about whether they should appear as individuals rather than representing Israeli government bodies like the Israeli Antiquities Authority, as a statement about the government of Israel's policy in particularly the occupied territories and in Gaza. This latest report, as I say, is from Middle East Monitor, and it alleges that the Israeli government is taking control of a fairly large chunk of land in the north of Nablus, which is in the occupied West Bank. And the Palestinian spokespeople are saying that the justification that's being given for this is the protection of archaeological sites. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism, this is it's particularly a Bronze Age site in an area called Sabastia, which is on the main road between the towns of Nablus and Jenin. It's a mountainous area, and it also contains remains from the apparently from the Arab, Canaanite, Roman, Byzantine, Phoenician, and Islamic periods, as well as the what I think the government of Israel might regard as the period of the biblical kingdoms. A spokesperson said this decision to take control of these areas represents a serious escalation and comes as part of a continuing legislative and legal move through which the occupying state, by which they mean the government of Israel, is seeking to oppose actual annexation of the West Bank under the cover of protecting archaeological sites. Now, obviously, allegations of that kind will only fuel the debate within EAA and other archaeological bodies about how the archaeological sector should respond to those kind of allegations. And obviously that there are two sides to that particular argument, and they will be that those arguments will be had and will continue, I'm sure.
Well, I'd say that there are more than two sides, but also as well, actually, you say the debate will continue when it's allowed to continue. Did the special meeting go ahead as planned for the EAA?
Right. Now,
extraordinary meeting.
I reached out to our sources at EAA, in fact, last week, to try and clarify what was going on, because there had been a move to bring forward a special meeting to discuss the attitude of the organisation to the participation of Israeli delegates. My understanding is that meeting is now not likely to take place until the first quarter of next year at the earliest.
Yeah, and it was meant to take place at the end of September, beginning of October, I think.
It's been a movable feast.
I wonder why. Okay, so what next?
Right. What next? It's another old favourite. It's the Parthenon marbles, currently held semi-permanently, I think we have to say these days, at the British Museum. Obviously, it's been a contentious issue pretty much since Lord Elgin exported them from Athens, allegedly with permission of the Ottoman government. Now it appears much more likely that, in fact, it was some sort of dodgy backstairs deal, if there was any kind of deal at all, with government to government. And in fact, the whole legal issue is one of the main issues of contention. New reader start here. There has been suggestions recently that under current chair of the British Museum Governors, George Osborne, and with a more sympathetic government in place in the shape of the government of, for the time being at least, people following British politics, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that there is more sympathy towards the Parthenon marbles being returned to the Parthenon Museum in Athens, reuniting the Parthenon friezes, basically. And that would be come with a quid pro quo that the Greeks would offer significant archaeological artifacts, some of which would never have left Greece. The Mask of Agamemnon from Mycenae, that found by Schliemann, is often quoted in this particular context. That might come to London as a quid pro quo.
Thank goodness, however, it comes to London. Brilliant. Something else I won't get to see. Sorry, go on.
It might go on tour, and we do have railways and internal flights and so on. So you're not that isolated in the northeast, Mark Monastles. But no, I agree. The London-centric.
London is an inescapable black hole where everything, except for perhaps some aspects of light, gets sucked in this country. But let's continue. Go on.
It is historically the capital city, and I think that does give it certain privileges. In practical geographical terms.
Yes.
Anyway, we can talk about this. And you're always saying we're disappearing down rabbit holes on the Watching Brief, and you've just disappeared down a rabbit hole which we could spend the rest of the show talking about. Yes. Anyway, look, the debate has been ongoing. There has been, it would appear, more chance that a deal would be reached than any time, certainly in the last 10-15 years. The previous Conservative government was absolutely against any kind of deal with the Greeks that would see the Parthenon friezes go back to Greece permanently. However, just in the last few days, it's been reported that the Greek Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, has told a panel discussion that Greece was no closer to getting back the Parthenon marbles than previously. And that's in spite of the offer of the quid pro quo of treasures from the Greek collection, national collection, coming to London. He said, and I'm quoting here from a report in the online magazine Greek Reporter, or online on news outlet Greek Reporter. He said that it's a complicated issue. No shit, Sherlock. And then he continued, it's no secret we've had discussions to find an arrangement that would work for both sides. I don't think we've made as much progress as I would like. But then he added, and I think this is significant, the British Museum's planned renovation could, quote, present new opportunities. But there appears to be, again, an argument about ownership. He said, this is not a typical restitution argument. This is a reunification argument. And that the British, at the moment, the British line is that they want the Greeks to give up ownership, and the Greeks, of course, aren't going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Another panelist on the on this particular discussion, the novelist Victoria Hislop, said that there was a growing opinion among the British public that the sculptures should come home. By that she meant come home to Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And these issues are only going to pile up for the British government and for the British Museum, I think, in terms of live issues at the moment. We haven't just got the Parthenon friezes. We've got the so-called Benin bronzes that were looted by the British Army at the end of the 19th century from the African Kingdom of Benin, now in Nigeria. There is a Moe statue, which is claimed by the Easter Islanders. And you've often quoted the Mold Gold Cape, which has been hijacked off to London. The Lewis chessmen have also been mentioned in this connection. There has been a certain amount of sharing within the UK. For example, items from the Sutton Hoo collection at the British Museum have been sent to the National Trust site visitor centre at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk. But that's a sort of internal transfer. There's no question about ownership. So, like all of these things, it's very, very complicated, and it's likely to. These discussions are likely to continue, as Prime Minister Mitsotakis suggested. I still think, on balance, at the moment, a deal is more likely than not. But that's just a hunch, really. And you know, it's pretty clear, reading between the lines, that the BM would like to find a solution to this. Apart from anything else, it does its image no good at all to be seen to be holding out in this way. But within the board and within the wider British political discussion, there is a certain amount of pushback, particularly from the right, about this kind of deal that could see our museums emptied of our treasures. Reform UK and the Conservative Party have voiced those kind of sentiments about the Parthenon friezes.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Well, yeah, planning, and it's good news, bad news. We're always talking about planning. There's a good news story this week, in that a burial site, a barrow cemetery in Cambridgeshire, a site called Money Hill, which contains 11 ancient burial mounds within a multi-period archaeological landscape. It was going to be heavily damaged by a cutting for the proposed east-west rail line. However, archaeological work to pre-development archaeological work, which is where much UK archaeology happens. So we talk about landscape surveys, geophysical surveys, LiDAR, drones, you name it. The modern tools of archaeologists looking at a landscape have identified various of these barrows. It's quite an extensive site. It appears to have been in use over several centuries in the certainly in the Bronze Age, and they've also identified potential archaeological features in between the barrows. Often you see the barrows as pimples on the landscape. We don't see what's in between. They appear to have identified things in between. So it's a significant historic landscape. It's now been scheduled by Historic England on the basis of those surveys. And East West Rail have amended their plans to change the cutting into a bored tunnel. So the landscape will be protected and not damaged. Okay. So that's the planning system as it's meant to work when archaeologists get involved. It changes things, it doesn't stop things.
Yeah.
But the other element of this, though, we've talked about the National Planning Policy Framework before. The government made another announcement this week in connection with its manifesto pledge to build thousands of over a million new homes before the end of the current Parliament. 1.5 million, in fact, under its so-called Plan for Change. The press release this week was about house building within, quotes, well-connected train stations. And so long as they fall within certain rules, including high quality, affordable homes, these planning applications will receive a default yes. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have to fulfill other environmental criteria, like, for example, an archaeological survey, but that will be absolutely preservation by record. The idea is that the development will now go ahead come what. So the implication is that even the most significant archaeology won't hold it up. Now, I think that this is the kind of thing that will it survive contact with reality. But that's certainly the government's intention is absolutely clear. They want to move quicker to planning, positive planning decisions, and they quote, for example, a new property company which the government is involved with, which is set to, as they put it, unlock 40,000 homes on brownfield land near railway stations, with 4 sites already earmarked, including one in Newcastle, the Newcastle 4th Goods Yard, and also another site in Manchester. Now, at the same time, the government has also announced a consultation into whether certain organisations, which are currently what are called statutory consultees, in planning, will no longer have that status. The 3 organisations that are talked about, one is Sport England. It would have its statutory role removed. The idea being that a developer would have to write to Sport England and say, I'm planning this development, do you have any comments? And Sport England say, there's no sign of the playing field there and you wouldn't be taking out a football pitch. We have no comment to make. And the idea being the developer wouldn't have to write that letter in the first place. Okay. People involved in sport might see that as a negative, because it takes it out of the discussion. Unless it's put back in by local communities or local authorities. The 2 that have a historical angle, who are being removed, or the government wants to remove as statutory consultees, are the Gardens Trust, which looks after parks and gardens and the interests of parks and gardens, including historic parks and gardens, and the Theatres Trust. And the Theatres Trust, for example, operates a theatre buildings at risk register separately to Historic England's. The Civic Theatre just down the road from me here in Greenwich is currently on the at-risk register because it's been sold off by the local authority to a developer. But obviously that isn't just major theatre buildings, it's buildings that have been used for public performances and things like that. So, you know, again, they but actually, on the strength of this, potentially that case I quoted here in Greenwich, they might not be asked if the developer comes forward with a plan to turn it all into flats. So, I mean, they will get involved anyway. But again, the statutory role, effectively, the importance of their comments is being downgraded. So that consultation opened earlier this week. The links are in the show information below the line. Please get involved.
Okay. So this week's episode revolves around an observation that was made by a friend of the show a couple of weeks ago, Rhys Booth, our Australian correspondent, I guess, in this instance. He had noticed a post on social media that had seemingly been edited, been altered, and this piqued your interest, and the story sort of proceeded from there, didn't it?
Well, to be fair, what Rhys posted, which is how you and I came to see it, a post from Wessex Archaeology, which announced a mentoring partnership program between Historic England and Wessex to upskill members of Wessex staff. And when I came to have a look at it, Reese also commented on the Wessex Archaeology thread, because it was couched a lot, the whole effectively press release announcement, public announcement, was framed around the first line is the heritage sector is facing a skills shortage. And Reese, along with a number of other people responding on the thread, talked about things like poor pay and conditions, historically poor pay and conditions, the lack of clear career progressions and so on in UK archaeology as being factors in that skill shortage. Now, what caught my eye was the second paragraph was a line which read, as more archaeology departments and training initiatives close across the UK, we're at risk of losing decades of valuable knowledge. And then it went on to say, we've recently secured funding from Historic England's Archaeology Mentoring Partnership Programme, da-di-da-di-da. So it went into the meat of the announcement about the programme that Wessex wanted to talk about. Now, I'd only seen a screen grab that Reese had taken. So doing my due diligence, I went back to the Wessex Archaeology Facebook feed and looked at the post. And what I found out, or what I noticed, was that paragraph about archaeology departments and training initiatives closing had been removed. So that the piece now read, the heritage sector is facing a skills shortage, and then going on to talk about we recently secured funding from Historic England and so on and so on and so on, which struck me as interesting.
So I suppose you could say that initial post with that text was providing the context in which this is good news, I guess, and the reason why this news is noteworthy, perhaps, but also as well, there are other interpretations, I suppose, but please continue.
Yeah. So, and just to clarify for people listening to this or watching this, the timeline, you may or may not be aware, but there is an edit history facility on Facebook, which you can access by right-clicking on by clicking on the three dots in the top right-hand corner of a Facebook post. And that's how I was able to see that the post had been edited. Intriguingly, the original post is time-stamped at 11:37 a.m. On the 5th of November. And the edit was time-stamped at 9 minutes past 9, 21:09 on the 5th of November. So sort of outside working hours, and that in England, and that struck me as slightly, well, interesting as well. So the question was, why had the post been edited, and why had it been edited in the evening? Was there some kind of urgency about it? And obviously the conspiracy theory might be that, for example, another body or a senior manager at Wessex had seen that second paragraph about archaeology departments and training initiatives closing and the sector being at risk of losing, quote, decades of valuable knowledge. And in spite of those being known issues within the sector and talked about widely within the sector, they didn't want, it would have been awkward in a cooperative project with Historic England to make a statement like that, right? So was there some kind of outside interference in that post asking for a change? No evidence that there was, but circumstantially there were some questions to answer. So Wessex Archaeology is one of our leading archaeological contracting units, famous for all sorts of things, including supplying the archaeological support for Time Team for 2 decades. And some of one of Time Team's most famous archaeologists, Phil Harding, was an employee at Wessex. So this is an organisation with a very strong track record, and a very strong track record actually in public archaeology. It's also supported things like the Ministry of Defence, Defence Infrastructure Organisation's Operation Nightingale archaeological programme as well, amongst other things. So it's and it doesn't just work in the area of sort of Wessex, Wiltshire, Hampshire, Salisbury Plain. It's effectively it's an international organisation. It's an important voice in archaeology, which again was another reason really to raise these questions. So anyway, as a big organisation, they do have a comms team who are all contactable via the website. So I reached out to the comms team and asked a number of questions. I asked them, for example, to confirm that the information on Facebook was accurate and the edit had been made, and to explain why it had been made, who'd instructed it to be made, were any external parties involved, and then the fact that the edit had been made without telling people who were reading it that it had been edited. Did that, first of all, did it downplay a well-known and widely discussed situation regarding training and capacity within UK archaeology, and therefore that the training initiative was no longer being seen in its full and proper context? And also, did that, the fact that again that it had been edited without notice, did that have an implication for how people might regard Wessex's public commentary in future? Would it undermine trust? Now, in the worst cases, when we've asked questions like that before of archaeological bodies, and in the worst case, I think we were threatened with being reported to the police for harassment.
Yes.
Other times
for asking one email's worth of questions.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in other cases, we are just met by a brick wall of silence. Sifa, if you would like to explain to us why Nathan Baker resigned so suddenly and was replaced by what appeared to be a very an unplanned succession, and explain how his appointment, which seems to have cost at least £20,000, only lasted barely 6 months, when it was meant to be taking the organisation forward into the future. We'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure your members would too. But I mean that's what we normally get. We asked, we were looking at that particular issue and got absolutely no comment whatsoever from anyone at CFIT, although it's clearly in the public interest. Here, I have to say, I was impressed actually that not only did Wessex's PR team get back promptly, they answered all the questions, I think, fully, certainly in their terms, and people will draw their own conclusions about the overall context of this particular issue and the motivations and so on. But in terms of a professional relationship with the sector and with the public and with people seeking to interpret things for that public in a professional and journalistic way, which I like to think we do, Wessex's response was absolutely exemplary. Now, what I'll do, I've outlined the questions that we sent, so I will read you the response from the head of comms at at Wessex in full. It's a woman called Nicola Kalimaris. I'm giving the name because it is there on the website, and the email was signed. It wasn't a spokesperson from Wessex said. So I'm sure, I hope she won't mind me quoting her in this context. I should also say cards on the table. I had actually met Nicola, but some time ago now, when she was studying public archaeology at UCL. But say we haven't had any contact since. So just putting that on the table. What Nicola said was as follows, and I'm quoting: "In response to your question, yes, we did edit the context of the post. This was a decision made by me as I lead the comms team. It was not requested by a third-party organisation or a member of our executive team, and they were not informed. The post was written and posted by a member of our comms team earlier in the day." That explains the morning posting timestamp on the original post. And she continues, "Upon seeing the post scrolling on our social media feeds that evening, I took the view that our explanation for the shortage of specialists in the heritage sector didn't represent the drivers for the mentor programme. In short, we'd made a mistake." And then she gave a link to the Historic England document that's available online. I'll come back to that in a moment. In explaining what had gone on, she said, quote, "In reality, the drivers behind skill shortages cannot be attributed to cuts in university archaeology departments alone. Organisations across the heritage world have a role to play, our own included. Universities do, of course, play an important role in training archaeologists, but structured workplace mentor programmes like this one are an opportunity to pass on the skills and learning of our most experienced specialists in those to those earlier in their careers and enable them to develop the expertise needed in professional archaeology." On the trust issue, she said, "In terms of whether we think that we've undermined public trust in Wessex, I made the edit in good faith because I felt we hadn't accurately represented the drivers for the programme. We won't be restoring the original text for the reasons stated above, but thank you for sharing your thoughts on declaring edits to post to ensure that we are being transparent and maintaining credibility. That is something we will consider carefully in future. As a comms team, we are very reflective and are continually evaluating and developing how we work to ensure we are following best practice and responding to feedback." And then of the programme itself, she said, "Over the coming months, we will be sharing more of Jasmine and Fiona's experience in the mentorship scheme. I hope you will follow their journey, and we will certainly take your comments on board and ensure our presentation of their experience and the challenges we face as a sector in terms of skill shortages is transparent."
Really
Perhaps I should say, yeah, and if I just say the Historic England document, it's called Archaeology Mentoring Partnership Grants, and to put it in context, the grants are on average between £3,000 and £7,000, and these are for partnerships of 3 to 12 months. To be completed by December 2026 next year. Why they are funding, this is what Nicola's referring to in her response as to the drivers behind the programme. It's basically Historic England, and what they're saying is, and I'm quoting here from their document, "The heritage sector makes an important but highly complex contribution to the national productivity. It creates over 450,000 jobs in the wider economy in industries such as tourism, construction, education, and the natural environment. Despite its comparative strength, significant challenges are predicted to affect the sector in future. Its ageing and unrepresented workforce means existing skill shortages and gaps risk being exacerbated." It then points out that pre-COVID, over 1% of all jobs in the heritage sector were classed as vacant due to a skill shortage, and 67% of organisations recorded shortages in specialist skills or knowledge needed to perform roles. And then it gets really interesting, because this isn't mentioned actually in the post either. But it says, "Through no fault of heritage professionals and an unforeseen knock-on effect of competitive tendering processes through which developer controlled archaeology is funded, recruitment is reactive to fill existing gaps with high level of expertise, and the idea of workforce development and succession planning is not fully embedded."
Again, this is accurate. Yes.
Absolutely
Yeah.
accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is a mismatch between supply and demand in the heritage workforce, Historic England say. There are skill gaps and shortages in the heritage sector, but limited opportunities provided for career progression opportunities in the sector. And then they say that previous interventions have shown that work-based and vocational training in the heritage sector leads to employment, and Historic England itself had great success in funding placement programs for over 15 years. And in fact, they've done that in many, many heritage skills areas, including craft skills as well as archaeological related ones. So things like building restoration and that kind of thing. Research commissioned by Historic England has identified a number of barriers to employers being able to and willing to offer apprenticeship opportunities, both in terms of early career new hires and as a tool for professional development, including cost, the length of time and delivery of programs, the content and alignment of apprenticeship standards, and a lack of understanding of how apprenticeships work. Now, again, we'll put the link to the document there. People can read it for themselves, but there is a strong critique there, really, of something that is, as you've just said, absolutely well known in archaeology, which is traditionally, certainly at the moment, archaeology is very largely a graduate profession. I think it's over 95% according to the most recent profiling of the profession statistics. But there has long been a criticism from contracting units that, for example, although it delivers graduate archaeologists, it doesn't deliver competent field workers, that they have to undergo additional training before they can go out digging out, doing archaeological evaluations ahead of a motorway, because the disciplines are different from a research dig to a commercial excavation, amongst other things. At the same time, there is an absolutely symbiotic relationship between universities and particularly complex archaeological excavations or major excavations, for example, involving organics or whatever, large amounts of animal bone, large amounts of human remains, where the research for this kind of work, and particularly the technical scientific angles for this, is done in universities. It's not done by the contracting units. And I think this is the circle. This is the squaring of the circle that they're trying to do. They're trying to bring those needs of the developer-funded sector together with the archaeologists who are coming into the sector, or who are already in the sector but need opportunities to upskill, which the units in and of themselves can find difficult to provide. So, it's an absolutely laudable program. And in a sense, the edit that was made, again, with the best of intentions, because it was felt to be maybe a distraction, a misrepresentation of what the program is actually about, has actually given us the excuse to go back to look at the program and say, actually, this is trying to address, in a very positive way, one of the biggest elephants in the archaeological room.
Absolutely. And yesterday, I should say, just for clarity's sake, was it yesterday or the day before? But we had an editorial conversation about this episode, and I absolutely fell down on the side of the editor in this instance, in so much as social media, like it or not, is not treated like a pure press release in that sense. And even actual press releases by actual governments are often subject to caveats and modifications even later on that day in a separate meeting. But when it comes to an announcement on Facebook, first of all, thankfully, yes, there is the editing history feature, so you can keep track of that. But also as well, there is an expectation that you can mold and alter what you've said to better serve the function of social media, and that is essentially, for the most part, especially when it comes to being a professional entity online, putting your best foot forward. And I think I remember during our conversation there was a point when you were a bit frustrated that this sort of record, as it were, public record, had been altered. But all I could do was repeat to you, but the story's focus was the placements. It was the good news. One did not want to encourage a conversation about something else, and indeed speculatively or tangentially connected to this good news story in the comment section below, which seemingly it had already done, actually.
Yeah.
For example, our friend and a friend of the show, Reese, had been involved in that conversation. So I think it's interesting how, just going back to those instances where CIFA, FAME, CBA, and others have an instinct of shut down, batten down the hatches, don't comment, it'll go away, put your fingers in your ears, la la la. It's interesting how actually in this instance, when a clear response is offered and an actual conversation is invited, in fact, and also as well, she was really good in just saying, taking the opportunity in that sense to also cheekily say, keep your eye on what's coming along the pipeline. In that sense, we've got good things as well. More to come on this story. It was courteous. It was professional. It was it acknowledged the possibility that confusion might have arisen from editing a statement in that way. But also as well, it didn't pretend that it hadn't happened. This response, this reply was a human one as much as it was a corporate one. It was one which said, we are a team. We are made up of people who are doing our best, and I took the decision to do this, that, and the other. It's kind of refreshing, not just having an organisation saying, no, we always get things right, and if we don't get things right, then we don't comment on it. And in that sense, I'm actually quite relieved by this and quite encouraged by this as a response. In that sense, good on Wessex for that. I suppose though, and this is where I do come back to where our conversation went the other day. There is the underlying question, isn't there? And as you say, one could go down the route of talking about conspiracy, but I think just more simply than that, applying a little bit of Occam's razor to it, it reflects a culture within UK archaeology of, and I think you used the word timidity. When it comes to looking head on at problems and addressing those problems, which may feel a bit uncomfortable, especially when ultimately the purse strings for those problems are in the hands of governmental departments or in the hands of, faculty outside archaeology and history departments within universities and so on and so forth. There is a tendency to not want to rock the boat, so that hopefully. And the impression that one gets is hopefully you won't get looked at for cuts. It's not even as though this timidity is one that will encourage a favourable outlook from our masters higher up the chain. It's more almost a case of, well, hopefully they won't see us as a problem, and therefore we won't stand out in their minds when they come to make changes in terms of budgets, etc. So. Yeah, I think there's definitely something there, and but also at the same time, I am and remain very sympathetic to the simple fact that the team's job is to focus on the good news that they're trying to communicate. Here is a scheme. Here are two people who are benefiting from this scheme. Isn't this fantastic? And I suppose ultimately the question is, where does that conversation happen, I suppose, isn't it? Where does the conversation that's implied by this scheme, where does it and where can it happen? Because at the moment, we're not seeing it being acknowledged by FAME, particularly when it comes to paying conditions. We're not seeing it really being acknowledged by CBA when it comes to university archaeologists in particular, and the academic aspect of archaeology. And we're definitely not seeing it properly addressed by CIFA in so much as process and the relationship between public and internal perception of the organisation is already a bit of a grey area, let alone having an open conversation about where people actually feel that we are as a profession and how we are or are not, as it were, being adequately funded in particular.
And of course, not every archaeologist is a member of CIFA. It's not, so that's a complication in of itself. I think it might help our viewer to understand that both Wessex and Historic England have comms teams who are trying to place those organisations, very different organisations, but within the broad heritage sector, and amid some very complex and potentially quite difficult relationships. So, for example, obviously Historic England is the government regulator in England. It depends on the government for basically its money, apart from what it can make from consultancy and so on, and charging for some of its services.
And even to be fair, even when it comes to its consultancy, it has a remit which is explicitly towards enabling so-called sustainable development. So in that sense, that there's a government touching of the scale in that sense as well.
Absolutely, and and this program is absolutely about ensuring some ongoing capacity within the developer-funded sector, which is primarily where an organisation like Wessex works, and works on some very, very high-profile projects, the major government infrastructure projects. The kind of work they do will be the along the lines of the HS2s, the Heathrow extensions, and projects of that scale. Obviously, they've with the almost certain cancellation of the Stonehenge bypass and tunnel, it coming in the next few months, that was going to be one of their big projects going forward. Now not going to be there, but again, you can see how their comms team have to steer a very difficult course on that one when you have something that is splitting not just the archaeological community but the wider public, and they're there apparently on one side of it. Because they're taking the shilling, absolutely correctly. There's no bad practice there, but it's a very difficult place to be when the winds of argument are blowing from both sides. So it's not an easy job, and also bearing in mind that particularly in situations like that of large scale projects, you'll have you'll be the contractor of a client who is very conscious of their own image and will want to use what you do to their purposes. And again, so that's a very difficult course to navigate. Are you being used? Are you being, put brutally? Are you being used to greenwash something? So it's not an easy place to be, and I think we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and again, I would just come back to the very simple analysis that it is this team's job to think about Wessex Archaeology's communication and and what it's communicating, how and where and when, and that's I even said to you, if we were on the PR team or on the comms team, this is what we would do. It's like this is more or less how we would want to behave in terms of communicating openly with questions that are asked about ongoing, and also acknowledging that ongoing learning is necessary. So
can I make one final point on that, and it's the point you made about social media and the role of social media and the status of social media. Obviously, at the moment, that's a really contentious area too. At the moment, our social media feeds are being flooded with AI slop, and also the outright algorithmically rigged misinformation, particularly on Twitter. And I think that's one of the reasons I asked the question about why wasn't the edit flagged up. Because certainly a lot of news organizations, and I do it on Pipeline, if I amend an article for a material reason, like a mistake, correcting a mistake, or a crucial piece of information that was missed out, I'll put at the bottom, this article was amended on so-and-so to do such and such. And that's about trust. It's about
that is about trust, but that's you being a news organization and news blog.
But the thing is, if you're a public-facing educational charity, which Wessex is, the reason I asked the question was, they have a certain. I'm asking the question?
Yeah.
Yes, I would answer it in a particular way. I would have acknowledged the edit.
But also, you've also just acknowledged that not all news organisations do that, and those are news organisations, let alone simply a Facebook presence for an archaeological unit.
A Facebook presence is publishing. Take Wessex out of the equation. Yeah. A Facebook presence of a constituted body is making public statements on behalf of that body. Yeah. And we've seen recently in the case of individuals that certainly as far as the law's concerned, saying, oh, I just put it on Twitter or I just put it on Facebook isn't an excuse.
But that isn't what happened here. And also we've already addressed the fact that Facebook has an edit history function.
Yeah.
So it is trackable. And also, to their credit, the team said that, being aware of this and maybe making announcements along those lines in the future is something that they will consider.
Absolutely. All I'm saying is that, had I edited that piece post facto, post publication, I would have acknowledged it because I would have felt I owed that to my audience. I'm not going to criticize Wessex for what they did, but I'm saying there are alternative ways of doing this. And yes, you're right. To their credit, they've said that's something they might factor in future. These dialogues are dynamic, and the grammar of them and the way we conduct them, like I say, particularly at the moment when there's so much misinformation around and so many political angles and axes being ground, and when archaeology and more broadly environmental interests are, as we talked about potentially earlier, being in some respects downgraded at government level. I think we all have to step up and be grown up about this stuff, and that means being honest with our audiences.
Yeah, but it also means being calm about understanding the context of how things unfold, and I think that has been achieved in this instance. This wasn't a shock horror story of an organisation trying to hide something, and the response of the organisation has actually been very sensible, and and in that sense, as the author of the response, but also as the team would encourage us to be, I look forward to seeing what comes out of these placements. Yeah.
I would just say, and I think certainly, if I appear to be being a bit heavy on this, I think it's, and I think maybe I don't know whether we're seeing our roles slightly differently. I think my role journalistically is to first of all identify stories that are worth telling in the public interest. It's to try and get behind them, and it's to try and find. Look, I mean, in the end, there's a very old joke in journalism that is at least 100 years old, and nobody quite knows where it comes from originally. But basically, it's The news is what somebody doesn't want you to print. Everything else is just advertising.
And what I would say is that the function of a Facebook page like that, as far as the organization is concerned, is advertising. And in that sense, I don't think actually that I view this from a particularly different angle to you. I do believe in clarity. I do believe in accountability. I really want to be able to shine our light of accountability and clarity on certain subjects that we cannot do at the moment because we're still tying down the scope of, and the legal bomb-proofness of the stories that we would like to tell. But in this instance, I suppose the only nuance that I'm trying to bring to this is an understanding of actually how people actually use social media. And, it's only been recently, it's only been in the past few years that actually the companies themselves, especially in terms of Facebook, have been approached along the lines of being responsible publishers of information, as opposed to just, hey, we just.
Well, they've always fought the idea that they're publishers. They're facilitators, not publishers.
Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, Meta, Facebook in particular, Mark Zuckerberg's operation, has very deliberately moved away from news.
Yes, but also they've moved away from fact checking. They've moved away from. In that sense, broadly speaking, the relationship between truth and people's safety as well. They've bended the knee in that sense, but that's a platform issue. But for a long time, and myself included, when it comes to Archaeosoup, I would think nothing of editing a Facebook post if it contained a spelling error, or if I thought it could be worded more effectively, or if I thought that the wording was detracting from the focus of the post, because that's, so in that sense, I have sympathy for how and why this can unfold. And also, crucially, in this instance, there is the post-tracking feature as well. But hopefully, I mean, in that sense, we both had perspectives on this and a conversation that presumably and hopefully people at home will benefit from and will enjoy. So, I don't think we need to be on exactly the same page. No. In everything, and in this instance, I am almost on the same page as you. It's just about the nuance of the context and also the reasons for the edit and this kind of thing. So, yeah, but I suppose just one more kudos to the team for actually responding. It's so refreshing to get a grown-up. And I mean this probably in a deliberately patronizing way to people who don't respond, a grown-up response to reasonable questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever one thinks of the discussion and questions that may or may not remain and so on, but basically they behaved utterly professionally in this, and that's exemplary. Yeah,
well done to them.
Yeah,
I suppose the only thing I would point out, and I'm sorry if this sounds frustrated, but it is kind of frustrating, is that actually there was a place set up a few years ago to talk about this stuff and to specifically focus on it when it comes to higher education, university departments, training, pipelines and funding. But it also fairly quickly died a death. Can you remember what that place was?
Are you referring to Safe British Archaeology?
No. Dig for Archaeology.
Oh, Dig for Archaeology. I beg your pardon. Sorry. This is yes, of course. Yeah.
In that sense, I don't expect these conversations to have happen in every instance on every unit's Facebook page. But it would be nice if there could be more of a broad spectrum ability to focus on these conversations and to have a designated place for them, because clearly there is a desire to have them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Can I pick you up on that actually? And I obviously, yes, I Save British Archaeology and Dig for Archaeology happened at, broadly speaking, the same time. It was, and it roughly coincided with the loss of undergraduate archaeology at Sheffield and the ongoing threat to the specialisms like osteoarchaeology and zooarchaeology, but also the complete loss of departments at Hull and at Worcester. And but if you remember the coverage that we gave it, then we were able to show that both those organisations, organised completely separately, were both in their own way shut down, prevented from speaking independently by vested interests within the broad archaeological establishment, not contracting units like Wessex, so-called representative bodies like the CBA, like CIFA, like FAME, and
others.
Yeah. Various Facebook groups were involved, but they were shut down. The words were formulas were spoken like we should, the archaeology should speak with one voice, and so on and so on and so on. The trouble was, when those voices were shut down, they weren't replaced by another voice.
No,
they've been replaced by, broadly speaking, silence and tumbleweed. When it comes to addressing these particular issues, and when members have, for example, have tried to push back on this, for example, over paying conditions at CIFA, they've been given various formulaic responses which have kicked the problem down the road, made it less contentious. FAME has said it wants to have nothing to do with anything that's to do with paying conditions for legal reasons, which some people say are understandable, others say actually are being overstated for self-interested reasons. So I'm not absolutely, and again, blowing our own trumpet for a moment. I think it's one of the reasons we do what we do on this show with Pipelines on. It's about being able to have independent input for archaeologists and archaeological interests into these arguments that doesn't have guardrails of wanting to maintain relationships with developers on the one side, government on the other. Or in the case, we don't care who we annoy.
No. But also in the case of Dig for Archaeology, very specifically, it feels like it was about organizational stamina as much as anything else.
Well, yeah.
And if they could have first of all had a team that was a bit broader, a bit wider, a bit less focused and or controlled or controlling, then actually they might have been able to sustain a record of archaeological good news, archaeological goodwill, and a community body that was ready to respond to new instances that come up in for example, select committees in government and so on and so forth. But it didn't happen. And I'm not going to go into that in any more detail here. At some point, we might talk about that in more detail. But it didn't happen.
People watching this can, we'll put the links in, but they can go to the back catalogue, the investigations on Pipeline, the discussions on Watching Brief. It's all there in the public domain. Yeah,
but I mean, the ultimate destination and fate of Dig for Archaeology, I don't think we've discussed in detail. And as I say, I don't think we're going to talk about that here today. No. But ultimately, it's just a missed opportunity, a missed opportunity to have that sort of collegiate body of work that can be a place where that sort of frustration that came to the fore on the Wessex Post can be logged and add to momentum in that sense. Yeah. Grand. So, anything that you'd like to say about any upcoming episodes of Watching Brief?
Just that I've been working on things this week. I think there's some interesting stuff coming forward. There's stuff we've had to postpone because sentencing was postponed. say no more.
And there's also a Christmas present that's been delayed from last Christmas.
Last Christmas. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. In fact, I was working on that last night. You'll be delighted to hear.
Yeah, so people should watch this space.
Our viewer might be even more delighted to hear. No, it's a bit of a sort of a bit of a Christmas present.
Yeah.
For fans of a certain genre in archaeology.
Exactly.
Yeah. And a certain podcast that's even longer than ours. But anyway, that's a whole other story. No, the only thing I want to add is please like, share, and subscribe to the Archaeosoup and Watching Brief channels. It helps us beat the algorithm. Ultimately, one day, if we get enough subscribers, it might even help us make more of these programs.
Exactly. Yes. Grand. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.